Okay, picking up where we left off, I just quickly want to show you how you can export this out to a flattened JPEG or PNG. So I've got my guide showing. If you don't, you can always, go up to View and then Show and then choose Guides. I've noticed for some reason in my version of Photoshop since the upgrade, guides will be selected here. It'll show the checkbox, check mark, but it won't actually show the guides. And so I click it and then they show up. So if that happens to you, it's happening to me too. So you can output for this first example. I'm asking you to, submit just your logo before we start including raster graphics with it. And so I'm not really particular about which version you want to send me. I'm not going to ask you for this version one of each size. So for instance, I'm not going to make you do a square and portrait and a landscape. So it's really up to you which one you want to do. You can also just do this full scale size if you want. I am going to choose the square though. And I'll show you how you can really easily crop this. Now, one thing that you could do is you could go up to the crop presets, but just so you know, it doesn't actually have the same dimensions as that. So it might make a difference. You might actually like all the extra white space if you want. You're welcome to just go ahead and crop it square like that. You could also, for this particular version, you could also do a 4:5 ratio, which will show you the portrait view. And then, you could also do like a 16:9 if you wanted. That's fine. I really don't care how you do this whenever you go to export it. But I do want to show you really quickly, if I get out of the crop tool and hit don't crop, one of the ways that you can use these masks that you created, which is kind of nice. So anytime you want to load a selection from a layer mask, all you need to do is click the thumbnail. Well, first of all, let me show you this. Let's click off of that somewhere. Let's go. In fact, let's just select some other layer entirely. I want to jump over to the channels panel. So if I go up here to Window and then I choose Channels, all right, it'll show me my channels. Now, one of the things that you'll notice is that I don't have any selection channels here, which you might think is strange considering that we actually have all of these alpha channels attached in our layers. In older versions of Photoshop, any kind of layer mask would automatically show up as a selection inside of your channels. But with newer versions of Photoshop, they've changed it so that they don't automatically show up and you can't just select them from your channels. What you can do, however, is you can select the channel here, and then whenever you click on channels, you'll see that it shows up right there, right? So that is one thing that you could do if you ever needed to edit that. That's one way of getting to it. Another way, though, of just loading this, all right, is that I could take this with the channel selected, or I should say the alpha transparency selected. And remember, this is not the alpha transparency. If you look right here, what this is the actual layer thumbnail. This is the alpha thumbnail. So I'm going to select the alpha transparency thumbnail, go up to select, and then load selection. And then by default, because I have that transparency selected, I have that layer mask selected, then it loads it right here in the channel, right? It gives me this as, you can see here it matches the name InstaSquare 1080 by 1080 mask, and it shows me this is InstaSquare 1080 by 1080, and it adds the word mask because it's actually telling me that it's actually the mask. So I'll say new selection, and then it loads it as a marquee for me, which is terrific. And what you can do with marquees, and this is the old way that Photoshop many versions ago used to require that you would crop things, is you would make a selection and then you would go up to image and then you would choose crop, right? And then it crops it, right? And that actually changed my canvas size. So that's one thing that you can do. And then in addition, you could do other things, like I showed you those crop presets. But this is nice so that you've already, if you've already got a specific mask and you've already got some selections made, you can just load them like that and you know that they'll be exactly what you intended them to be. So I can go here and I can say, before I do anything, first of all, I want to make sure that you understand that you do not save it like this. Like, you do not save this PSD file like this. You want to make sure that you can always jump backwards in the history. This is just sort of like a convenient tool. You want to be able to later jump back in the history to get your full document again. All right, but for right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to File, and then I'll say Export, and I'll say Export As. And it will bring up my export window. And I can choose the format of JPEG or PNG or whatever, but for now, you could also do SVG. If you want, you can export it as SVG. The problem with SVG is that unless you actually change your text to a vector shape, then the chances that anyone's ever going to have the weird font that you chose on their computer is unlikely, and so it will substitute the font. SVG looks at type as type. It doesn't look at it as a vector unless you convert it to a vector. So we're just going to stick with something like JPEG or PNG. For PNG, I'm going to take off transparency, but if you wanted transparency, like let's say that you had black on white and you had a drop shadow and you wanted to drop your background color out, you could choose transparency with the PNG, and then all you would get is like a floating logo and it would work on top of anything. All right, so that's one option. And then you've got your image size here. You could make some changes, but I'm not going to. You do want convert to sRGB to be the default. That color space is a good web space color. All right, and then you would go ahead and click export, and it's going to go ahead and try to export it directly into your project 2 folder that you've got. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and create a new folder, and I'm going to call it output files. And inside of that folder, that's where I'm going to put all of my exported PNGs or JPEGs or whatever. And on yours, I'm going to ask you to do this as like last name dash logo, where your last name is your actual last name. So in my case, it would be like Cotner dash logo. And you can go ahead and save that. And it saves that out as a PNG file. And if you wanted to just jump back over there real quick, you could take a peek, and there is my output file. Okay, great. Now I could also go back just so you can see. We'll do that as a JPEG as well. Oops. All right, there we go. And then you want to adjust the quality. I'm going to suggest that you go ahead and leave it at 100%, but you can take a peek and see what different percentages would look like. You're going to end up getting artifacts, these little like pixelation things around your type and around your any places where the color's changing. The lower the quality is. You can adjust, some of your quality, and if I blow this up, you can see all the artifacts that it's going to give me, right? You can see that in here. Whereas if I were to take that up to like 75, let's do 75, not 7. And you can see a lot of those artifacts disappear, but it's still not perfect if you were to look closely. If we go back up to 100, you can see that it gets even cleaner in a lot of spots. All right, so and then that's what you do, and you'd save it as a JPEG, and then I'm not going to do that though. Now, it's important that you don't save this PSD like this. What you want to do is you want to jump back into your history, and you want to go back to maybe your load selection or even open, right, if you had it saved the way you wanted it to. And now you've got your regular file again, right? And if you wanted to go and see what it looks like to, load this selection, right? You could go up here, select, load selection, and then rectangle 1 mask. Oh, I didn't give that a name, I guess. Probably should do that actually. So we'll call this Insta Portrait, like that. Okay. And actually, let's go ahead and do it at let's see, 1080 by 1350. All right, I'll save this. Okay, so we've got that. Now if I select my layer mask and go to load selection, now it's got the correct name. And then it loads my selection. If I wanted, I could do my image crop like I did before. All right, that's an alternative that maybe you don't know because it's an old way of doing it, but sometimes the old way, knowing the old way that used to be the standard way in Photoshop, sometimes actually is really good because it gives you flexibility on some things that you might not have otherwise known how to do. Now on this portrait one, you can always just go up to the crop presets and then choose. You could do it based off the selection. That's one other option. But you could also go to the 4.5 and it's going to be identical, right? So anyway, just so you know, those are some options. And you'd still want to jump back in your timeline. But that's how you export a flat file out, okay? And then now you can move on. The next tutorial set's going to cover how you can start integrating raster graphics in here to create a message.